China just delivered a shock Washington didn't see coming. Beijing has ordered every Chinese company to stop buying American-made chips. Overnight, the flow of US semiconductors into China's massive tech industry has been cut off. And the first tremors are already being felt. Scott Bessent, Wall Street's so-called genius investor and now US Treasury Secretary, is reportedly in panic mode. Donald Trump thought he had set a clever trap. He loosened restrictions so Nvidia could sell its new H20 AI chips to China, confident Beijing would line up to buy them. In Washington's view, it looked perfect. China gets advanced processors, American firms cash in, and the US Treasury skims 15% off every sale. For Trump, it was supposed to be easy money. Technology, profit, and leverage rolled into one. But Beijing didn't just say no. They slammed the door shut and bolted it. Xi Jinping's government told Chinese firms to cancel orders not only from Nvidia, but also from AMD, cutting off two of America's biggest chipmakers in a single move. Then came new rules banning US chips from government-backed projects altogether. The message was unmistakable. China is done playing by Washington's rules. This isn't about whether the H20 is powerful enough or if American processors still have an edge. It's about control. Beijing wants the world to see it won't be cornered by US tech or trapped in dependence. What Washington called a victory has been flipped into a public defeat, and the fallout goes far beyond one bad deal. US chipmakers have depended on China for decades, earning billions from its vast market. Without Chinese buyers, their future revenue and global dominance are at risk. The timing couldn't be worse. America is already burdened with debt, inflation, and political turmoil. Losing its biggest tech customer now is like pulling the rug out from under an already shaky economy. This isn't just trade. It's a fight for global influence. Right now, Beijing looks confident and strategic, while Washington stumbles through missteps. Before we break down how it all unfolded, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the full analysis. Let's dive in. Let's break this down carefully, because what's happening today didn't appear overnight. It's the result of years of US policy decisions that, ironically, ended up creating the very situation Washington was trying to prevent. For more than a decade, the strategy out of Washington was to keep China away from the cutting edge of semiconductors. Administrations from both parties leaned on the same approach: tighten export rules, restrict access to the most advanced processors, and choke off sales of critical design tools and manufacturing equipment. The logic seemed simple enough. If China couldn't get its hands on the fastest chips, then its progress in areas like artificial intelligence, supercomputing, and advanced manufacturing would stall. On paper, that strategy looked solid. But while Washington was busy drafting restrictions, Beijing was busy building. China poured tens of billions of dollars into its own semiconductor industry. Entire industrial parks were dedicated to chip fabrication. Universities expanded engineering programs, training thousands of specialists. And local governments offered subsidies to firms working on everything from chip design to lithography equipment. Progress was uneven at first, but it was steady, and in some cases, faster than US policymakers expected. A gap that analysts once said would take a decade to close was sometimes narrowed in just 4 or 5 years. That should have been a wake-up call, yet in Washington, most assumed China would remain dependent for much longer. Then came Trump's trade war, and that's when the pace accelerated even more. Tariffs on Chinese goods, sweeping sanctions on tech companies, and additional chip restrictions were rolled out one after another. The goal was to put Beijing on the defensive, to weaken its bargaining position. But the effect was the opposite. Instead of slowing down, China treated it as a national mission to break free from American suppliers. Being cut off became the fuel that pushed them to double their efforts. Entire supply chains were redesigned. Investment into domestic alternatives skyrocketed. What was once a long-term ambition turned into an urgent priority. Eventually, Washington realized that its own companies were bleeding from these restrictions. Nvidia, Qualcomm, Intel, all had deep business in China, and without that market, billions of dollars in revenue were disappearing. So Trump adjusted course. Nvidia's new H20 chip, designed specifically for China to meet export compliance rules, was put back on the table. To make it politically appealing, he added a 15% tax on every sale, pitching it as a clever win for the US economy. In theory, China would get some of the hardware it needed, American firms would regain their biggest customers, and the Treasury would rake in billions. But Beijing didn't take the bait. Instead, guidance went out telling Chinese firms to cancel orders for US chips, including the H20. The timing was deliberate. By then, China had rolled out its own high-performance AI systems like DeepSeek, which showed that domestic technology could compete head-to-head with Western platforms. Its debut rattled the industry because it proved something Washington hoped wasn't true. China no longer had to wait for US hardware to move forward. And let's not forget, the H20 wasn't even a full product. It was a downgraded version, deliberately stripped of some capabilities to meet US export rules. From Beijing's perspective, this wasn't partnership, it was humiliation. Pay a higher price for weaker chips, and on top of that, let Washington skim off a tax? That didn't look like cooperation. It looked like dependence with a toll booth. So Beijing made its choice. They slammed the brakes on US chip imports and turned it into a public display of confidence. The message to Washington was unmistakable. Chinese companies will no longer build their future on American processors. And the message to the rest of the world was just as powerful. China is ready to stand on its own. This moment isn't just about rejecting one chip or one company. It shows how much the balance has shifted. For the US, the ban is a warning that the strategy of restricting access has reached its limits. For China, it's a chance to prove that years of investment and preparation are finally paying off. When we talk about America's dependence on China in the tech sector, we're not describing a side market or a minor revenue stream. We're talking about one of the largest consumer bases and industrial ecosystems on Earth. A market so critical that losing it can shake entire corporate balance sheets. Take Apple. For years, China has been both a key market and its main production hub. In 2023, nearly 19% of Apple's global revenue came from Greater China. Almost 1 in $5. That's not just iPhones flying off shelves in Beijing or Shanghai. It's also the factories, suppliers, and logistics that keep Apple's global launches on schedule. If Beijing tightens restrictions, Apple takes a double hit, falling sales and bottlenecks in production. And the scale is obvious. Outside the US, China has more Apple stores than any other country. Now look at Nvidia, the face of America's AI boom. In 2022, about a quarter of its data center revenue came from China. Chinese AI labs and cloud firms were major buyers, ordering thousands of GPUs. But US export rules forced Nvidia to make cut-down China-only chips like the A800 and H20. Without full access, Nvidia risks losing billions. Analysts say smooth sales to China could have added around $15 billion, revenue now out of reach. Then there's Qualcomm. Its chips power Chinese smartphone brands like Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo. In 2023, China made up 64% of Qualcomm's total revenue. And those processors don't just stay in China, they ship worldwide. Without that scale, Qualcomm would struggle to fund the R&D needed to stay competitive. Even firms that aren't as dependent on hardware sales feel the weight of the Chinese market. Microsoft earns steady income in China through Windows licenses, enterprise software, and its Azure cloud services, often delivered through joint ventures and local partners. And Tesla, though not a pure tech firm, relies on China as both a manufacturing hub and one of its largest electric vehicle markets. Its Shanghai Gigafactory alone produces hundreds of thousands of cars each year, many of which are sold locally. What ties all these companies together is scale. China isn't just another large market, it's a unique one. Hundreds of millions of middle-class consumers, massive state-backed infrastructure projects, and corporate buyers capable of placing orders at a scale few other countries can match. That combination doesn't just boost revenue, it creates the economies of scale that make cutting-edge products affordable and financially viable. And here's where politics collides with reality. In Washington, talk of decoupling has become popular rhetoric. But the numbers don't lie. For America's biggest tech firms, China isn't optional, it's indispensable. If Beijing ever shuts the door completely, the impact would travel from company earnings to Wall Street indexes in a matter of hours. Now let's bring Scott Bessent into the picture. For those who don't know him, Bessent isn't just another Wall Street name. He's a hedge fund billionaire who built his reputation betting on global markets and later stepped into politics as one of Trump's key economic voices. Today, he sits at the heart of U.S. financial strategy as Treasury Secretary. And right now, this chip standoff with China is pulling him directly into the storm. What stands out is that Bessent may not fully back Washington's hard line. Reports suggest he knows how damaging China's chip ban could be for U.S. firms. Nvidia, Qualcomm, and Intel are already losing orders, and with every cancellation, billions in revenue vanish. For someone tasked with keeping America's finances steady, that's a crisis too big to ignore. Insiders say Bessent has quietly looked for ways to soften the blow, possibly even by reopening talks with Beijing. But here's the problem. Once China makes a move like this, it can't be undone with a phone call. Trust is already broken. Even if the US strikes a temporary deal, Chinese companies will think twice before tying their future to American suppliers. That's the real danger. This isn't about one contract. It's about a long-term shift in global tech trade. And the ripple effects go far beyond chip makers. Semiconductors power everything. Phones, EVs, cloud computing, medical tech, even weapons. If China designs products to run fully on domestic or non-US chips, the entire ecosystem, upgrades, software, intellectual property, could start bypassing America. That's not only financial loss, it's a loss of influence, the foundation of US tech dominance. The world is watching. If Beijing proves it can replace US chips without losing performance or innovation, others may diversify too. Every step away from American suppliers gives Chinese firms more space to grow. And with each market that shifts, Washington's grip on tech leadership slips further. For decades, America's edge in semiconductors has been the backbone of its global power. With one bold move, Beijing is now testing just how fragile that dominance really is. Across the United States, manufacturers are waking up to a harsh reality. The parts and materials they depend on, specialized machinery, precision components, even raw inputs, are now more expensive, harder to source, and sometimes not arriving at all. What used to be a steady flow of goods from overseas has turned into delays, soaring shipping costs, and endless paperwork. On the factory floor, the impact is immediate. Orders that once filled whole shifts are drying up. Managers are cutting hours, scaling back, and even shutting down lines just to stay afloat. Workers promised stability under the slogan of bringing jobs back now face smaller paychecks and empty halls. What was billed as a manufacturing revival looks more like survival mode. And this isn't just about China. The trade war has widened, straining ties with US allies too. Europe, Asia, and beyond are reassessing partnerships with Washington. Constant tariff threats and unpredictable policies have left them wondering, can America be trusted as a stable partner? More and more, the answer is no. That's why countries are quietly building new systems outside US control, regional trade blocs, alternative financial networks, and partnerships that bypass Washington. Once these structures are in place, America won't be able to dictate terms the way it has for decades. And that's the bigger picture. While US officials chase short-term wins, the global trade system is being rebuilt without them. The danger isn't just higher costs today. It's the moment the world realizes it no longer needs America to keep things running. When that happens, US leverage won't just weaken, it could collapse. So the question now is simple. Has Washington already lost its power to shape the global economy, or is there still a way back? If you want to keep track of these shifts and see where they lead, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.